You can hear the engine before you see it, a low, steady rumble that vibrates through the ground beneath your boots. 30 tons of steel rolling toward you at 25 miles per hour. And the thing is, it's on your side. You helped build it. You trained inside it. You depend on it to keep you alive. But somewhere in the back of your mind, a question you never say out loud: will it burn before you can get out? This is the Sherman tank, the most produced American tank of World War II. Over 49,000 units built. Fielded by the United States, Britain, Canada, the Soviet Union, and a dozen other allied nations, the backbone of armored warfare on the Western Front. And also quietly, among the men who crewed it, one of the most feared machines a soldier could find himself locked inside. How does that happen? How does a weapon become both a lifeline and a death trap to the same men? To understand that, you need to go back to 1940. The German Blitzkrieg has just torn through France in 6 weeks. Allied commanders are watching grainy intelligence footage of panzer divisions rolling through burning cities. The United States doesn't have a modern tank, not one that can fight a real war. The M2 Medium, the best America has at that moment, is a prototype-era machine with thin armor and a low-velocity 37mm gun. It would not survive contact with a German Panzer III, let alone a Panzer IV. The order goes out. Design something that works. Design it fast. What emerges is the M4 Sherman, named after Union General William Tecumseh Sherman, though the crews rarely thought about that. To them, it was just the Sherman. And from the moment it entered production in 1941, it was a compromise machine built at a speed the world had never seen. The Detroit Arsenal plant, converted from automobile manufacturing, begins rolling out Shermans at a rate that would eventually hit 2,000 units per month. That number matters. In industrial warfare, volume is a weapon. Here is what made the Sherman genuinely good. It was reliable. Mechanically, it was far more dependable than the German tanks it faced. The Panzer IV broke down regularly on long advances. The Panther, Germany's response to the Soviet T-34, suffered chronic transmission failures throughout 1943 and 1944. Heinz Guderian, the architect of German armored doctrine and author of the 1937 manual Achtung Panzer, wrote in his post-war memoirs that German tank production never solved the fundamental tension between firepower, armor, and mechanical reliability. The Sherman solved it differently. It didn't win on any single metric. It won by working every single day. It was also easy to repair. The radial aircraft engine used in early models could be pulled and replaced in the field in under an hour by a trained crew. Spare parts were standardized across thousands of units. A Sherman that took a hit to its running gear in Normandy could be back in action by the next morning. A damaged Panther might sit immobile for a week, waiting for parts that had to be shipped from Germany. And the Sherman was fast, 25 to 30 miles per hour on a road that was competitive with almost everything it faced. Patton's Third Army used that speed to execute the Breakout after D-Day, the armored sweep through France in the summer of 1944 that covered more ground per day than almost any operation in the war. The Sherman made that possible. So what was the fear? It starts with a nickname. The Germans called it the Tommy Cooker, a reference to British soldiers, Tommies, and the small field stoves they carried. The implication was cruel and exact. When a Sherman burned, it burned fast. American crews called it the Ronson, after the cigarette lighter whose advertising slogan was, "Lights first time, every time." The problem was the ammunition. Early Shermans stored their main gun rounds in the sponsons, the flat horizontal surfaces on either side of the hull interior. Those rounds were not wet stowed, meaning they had no fire suppression system around them. When an armor-piercing round from a German 7.5mm or 8mm gun punched through the Sherman's side armor, it frequently ignited those shells. The resulting fire was catastrophic. Not a slow burn, a detonation. Crews had roughly 8 to 15 seconds, some accounts say less, to escape a brewing Sherman before the ammunition cooked off. You think about that number, 8 seconds. You are sitting in a steel box. The entry hatch is above you or beside you. The driver and co-driver exit through hatches in the hull floor hatches that can jam if the tank settles on soft ground or takes a torsional hit. 8 seconds. The 2nd Armored Division's after-action reports from the Normandy campaign, declassified after the war, document crew loss rates that senior commanders were reluctant to publish during the conflict. In tank-on-tank engagements against Panzer IV and Panther units, not the rare Tiger, the common Panzer IV Sherman crews suffered disproportionate losses when they engaged at ranges above 500 meters. At that distance, the early 7.5mm Sherman gun struggled to penetrate the Panther's frontal armor. The Panther's 7.5mm long barrel gun could penetrate a Sherman frontally at over 1,000 meters. This is the gap that General Omar Bradley, commander of the U.S. First Army in Normandy, acknowledged privately and wrestled with publicly. His memoir, A Soldier's Story, describes the pressure he received from armored commanders who wanted the 7.6mm upgunned Sherman, a more capable version fielded faster. The 7.6mm gun, introduced in mid-1944, significantly improved the Sherman's ability to penetrate German medium armor. But the original 7.5mm version remained the majority of the force through most of the Western Front campaign. So crews developed tactics. They learned not to fight Panthers frontally. They worked in groups 3 or 4 Shermans to one German tank, trying to flank, trying to get around into the thinner side or rear armor. Sergeant Lafayette Poole, one of the most decorated American tank commanders of the war, ran his Sherman through France in the summer of 1944, destroying over 250 enemy vehicles before his tank was finally knocked out in September. He survived. His gunner didn't. Poole's approach, aggressive flanking, constant movement, never stopping in the open, was not exceptional. It was survival methodology learned by every experienced Sherman crew. The Wet Stowage upgrade, introduced in the M4 A176W and other late production variants, surrounded the ammunition racks with a water glycol mixture. Testing showed it reduced ammunition fires by over 70% in penetrating hits. Crews who received Wet Stow Shermans noticed. The Ronson nickname didn't disappear, but the dread behind it softened. By the time of Operation Cobra, the July 1944 breakout from the Normandy hedgerows and the subsequent drive toward the Rhine, the Sherman had become something its crews understood deeply. Not a superior machine, not a tank that won through raw armor or raw firepower, a machine that won through numbers, through logistics, through the ability to show up in the right place at the right time with enough rounds still in the rack. Dwight Eisenhower, in his post-war reflections, argued that the Allied victory in Northwest Europe was fundamentally a logistical victory. The Sherman was a logistical argument in steel. Every time one burned, 3 more came off a ship in Cherbourg. That is the counterintuitive truth of the Sherman. It was not the best tank of World War II by almost any conventional measure. It was arguably not even the best Allied tank. The Soviet T-3485 outgunned it. The British Firefly variant of the Sherman itself outgunned it. But the Sherman, in its mass, in its reliability, in the industrial system that kept replacing it, was one of the decisive weapons of the war. And here is what you sit with, thinking about the men who crewed it. They knew. They knew what the Ronson could mean. They knew the 8 seconds. They knew the gap between their gun and the Panther's. And they climbed in anyway every morning of every advance. Through Normandy, through the Falaise Pocket, through the Siegfried Line, through the Rhineland winter, and they drove it forward. Because the thing you learn studying the Sherman isn't really about armor thickness or muzzle velocity or fire suppression systems, it's about the gap between what you're given and what you do with it. Every crew that figured out the flanking tactic, every commander who kept his unit moving, every mechanic who had a replacement engine bolted in before dawn, they closed that gap with something no tank specification can measure. You can hear the engine before you see it. 30 tons of steel. It's on your side, and you already know everything it can and cannot do. You climb in anyway.